Welcome to BCast, Benesch's business law videocast series. This is where we discuss the most topical, legal, and business issues. In this issue, we're going to be talking to Rob Zimmerman, partner and chair of Benesch's Public Law Practice Group. Today, host Eric Zalad is going to talk with Rob about state budget highlights.
Hello, I'm Eric Zalad, head of the litigation department here at Benesch. I have with me Rob Zimmerman, who's head of our Public Law Practice Group, to answer a few questions for us about highlights of the recent state budget here. So Rob, which aspects of the state budget passed just this June were most important for businesses?
Well, Eric, I think in order to properly answer that question, I've got to talk a little bit about the environment in Columbus. And I'm here sitting as a Democrat, and I'm here to tell you that Columbus, Ohio, in the State House, that's Republican-occupied territory. That's the way the voters in Ohio want it, and that's the way it's being done. So we have a Republican governor, a Republican House of Representatives with an overwhelming majority of 60 to 39, and a Republican Senate with also an overwhelming majority of 23 to 10. So one might think, well, the governor got whatever he wanted, right? Because the House and Senate, they're Republican, the governors are Republican, so the governor was able to pass everything that he wanted. It didn't quite happen that way. And when it came to issues specifically related to small business and business in general, as well as individuals, it was almost like following a yo-yo, because there was a lot of tax policy that was very important to the governor that frankly members of the House and Senate, even members of the Republican caucuses of the House and Senate, disagreed with. So I think in order to thoroughly answer the question, I'll have to take you through some of the yo-yo when it came through the tax rates and some of the disagreements about how to handle a small business tax cut. So let's go through that. In the as-introduced version, this goes back to this past February, this was the governor's proposal, which was originally introduced in the Ohio House as House Bill 59. That version, as it related to tax rates for individuals, reduced tax rates for all individuals, trusts, and estates by 7.5% in 2013, 15% in 2014, and 20% in 2015. Also included in the proposal was a small business tax cut. Individuals who have income from trade or businesses were able to deduct 1/2 of net business income apportioned to Ohio in computing Ohio taxable income up to $375,000, which was a significant amount of money. What did the House do to this? The House made some substantial changes. In the version passed by the House of Representatives, they scrapped the governor's income tax proposal in favor of one that reduced tax rates in all brackets by 7% in tax year 2013 and thereafter. And there was no small business tax cut at all in the version passed by the Ohio House. Once the House passed its version of the budget, it went over to the Ohio Senate. And in its deliberations, they made some further changes. They deleted the House's change in the income tax rates, meaning that, at least insofar as the Senate was concerned, there was no change in income tax rates. Everything just stayed the same. But they did restore the governor's small business tax cut in the amount that I previously described. Because we had a disagreement between the House and the Senate, a conference committee was convened, and the conference committee tried to reconcile the differences between the House version and the Senate version of the budget. Here's what the conference committee came up with, and ultimately this was the version adopted by both the House and the Senate and signed by the governor. The final version retained the governor's small business tax cut, but in a much smaller version. And that set a maximum deduction for married couples filing separate returns to $62,500 for each spouse and $125,000 for single or joint filers. With regard to tax rates, those were reduced by 8.5% in 2013 and 9% in 2014. So again, a smaller small business tax cut and a smaller version of the income tax rate reduction as compared to the as introduced version by the governor. And it really is interesting to see tax policy chewed on by the legislature, even when you have a legislature that is in the same party as the governor.
So it took them a while to get there, but they got to their destination.
They ultimately did, and some may disagree with what ultimately was decided, but they're there and it's now the law.
It's a big budget, I know. Rob, are there any other parts of the budget that it would be important for people to be aware of?
Well, certainly, Eric, and we can talk for hours, maybe even days, about things of interest in the budget, but I know we don't have that time. And I want to give you another example where the governor was suggesting a substantial change in tax policy to a Republican legislature, and ultimately the governor did not get what he wanted. Perhaps the most controversial aspect of the budget, at least as it relates to business, was the governor's proposed expansion of the sales and use tax. In the as-introduced version of the budget, the governor proposed a reduction in the overall sales tax rate, but more importantly, the governor proposed a very large expansion of the actual sales and use tax itself, including industries such as law, accounting, financial services, dog grooming. I could go on and on. And as you can imagine, Eric, this set off a flurry of lobbying by business groups, trade associations, including our own bar association, making the argument to the legislature that this was a bad idea, and ultimately the expansion of the sales and use tax was scrapped. It was extremely controversial. Many policy think tanks thought it was a very good idea, a way to expand the state's tax base, a way to make it somewhat more regressive and some would say somewhat more fair. But at the end of the day, I think we kind of saw the value of lobbying, and those that got involved were able to have their voices heard. And the proposed expansion of the sales and use tax was scrapped by the Ohio House, and we never saw it again.
All right, well, let's get off the budget, Rob. Any other issues of interest involving the state government that we should be aware of?
Absolutely, Eric. Another controversial issue that was part of the state budget but was ultimately removed and is still being discussed right now is so-called Medicaid expansion, or depending on who you talk to, Medicaid reform. Now, as you probably know, and many of our viewers know, the governor very strongly advocated for Medicaid expansion under the provisions of the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare. And the governor's proposal was to expand the availability of Medicaid to those who were up to 138% of the poverty level, and that would have covered many, many more people in Ohio who previously were not eligible for Medicaid. They would be covered under the Medicaid expansion proposal made by the governor in his initial budget introduced in the Ohio House. That ultimately was removed by the Ohio House to the great chagrin of the governor, and in fact there was a provision included in the version passed by the Ohio House that actually prohibited Ohio from expanding Medicaid in the way that the governor wanted to do so under the provisions of the Affordable Care Act. The governor ultimately vetoed that particular proposal, but most importantly, Medicaid expansion was not included in the version of the budget ultimately passed by the House, the Senate, Conference Committee, and ultimately adopted by the House and Senate and signed by the governor himself. So you may ask, well, where do things stand right now? Can't really answer that. Right now, the legislature is poised to come back this fall. A number of legislators and committees are looking at Medicaid, but right now the latest information is that there may not be Medicaid expansion, such as what was originally proposed by the governor, but there may be a lot of Medicaid reform proposals which will be very detailed, and I can't really speak to them with any type of detailed information because, as I said, they're being discussed right now, and I'll expect to see some legislation introduced in the fall. But this is very important because Medicaid is a very large proportion of the state budget. It's obviously very controversial. It's a very partisan issue because of the strong feelings that many have about Obamacare, either in favor or opposed. And this is something that's going to have profound effects not only in the state budget, but frankly the fiscal health of the state of Ohio, and not to mention the actual physical health of its residents. So it's one of those things that we're going to have to see play out over the next months, and it'll be fascinating because here again you have a Republican governor who very strongly favors the idea of Medicaid expansion, and you have many people in his own party who are just as strongly opposed. How it's going to ultimately turn out, I don't know, but I do know it's going to be very important for the state.
Well, it sounds like we should stay tuned, Rob, but for now, we appreciate your insight into these very complex issues that seem to impact most Ohioans and most Ohio businesses. So thank you for your time.
Eric, thank you.